The measure of a man is what he does with power. Plato. There comes a moment in life when nobody asks whether you are ready. Nobody sends a warning. Nobody waits for your confidence to rise. Life simply places responsibility in your hands and says, now lead. And that moment can feel terrifying. Maybe you thought leadership belonged to the loudest person in the room, the most educated, the most talented, or the most confident. Maybe you believed leaders are born with a special shine that ordinary people do not have. But history keeps proving something different. Sometimes leadership is not a reward for comfort. Sometimes it is a calling forced upon you by pressure, by pain, by crisis, by necessity. A young man loses his father and suddenly becomes the oldest voice in the house. A daughter watches her family collapse and becomes the one everyone depends on. A student sees chaos around him and becomes the one who brings order. A worker is ignored for years, and then, in one critical moment, everybody turns to him because he is the only one calm enough to think clearly. In those moments, leadership is not optional. That is why this message matters. Because many people are waiting to feel like leaders before they become leaders. But real leadership does not begin with feelings. It begins when responsibility arrives before comfort. And when that happens, the weak break, but the wise grow. The timid hide, but the purposeful stand. The uncertain become useful. The willing become trustworthy. Today, I want to speak to the part of you that has been pushed, stretched, tested, and challenged. The part of you that has already learned that life will not always ask permission before demanding maturity. This is the story of how pressure can become purpose, how burden can become authority, and how forced responsibility can reveal the leader that was sleeping inside you. This is Forced to Become a Leader, and by the end, you will understand why that title is not just a phrase, but a law of development. And that final thought from the introduction is where the real journey begins. Pressure can become purpose, burden can become authority, and forced responsibility can reveal the leader that was sleeping inside you. That is not poetry, that is reality. Because the first thing life does when it wants to develop a leader is not to comfort him, it tests him. Sometimes the test comes quietly. A family problem lands on your shoulders. A sudden financial need enters your home. A younger brother looks at you for answers. A mother gets tired. A father becomes absent. A workplace becomes chaotic. A school group collapses. And suddenly, without asking for your permission, life places a weight on you that you never planned to carry. That is the moment most people panic. But that is also the moment leadership begins. A person who has never carried anything heavy may think strength is a theory, but the weight of life makes strength practical. You do not discover leadership when people are clapping for you. You discover leadership when people are depending on you. That is why this chapter matters so much, because the burden is not simply there to hurt you, it is there to reveal you. History always proves this principle. Moses was not introduced to destiny in a palace filled with comfort. He was forced through a wilderness of identity, rejection, and responsibility. He did not walk into leadership because he felt qualified. He stepped into leadership because a calling greater than his fear demanded it. And that is exactly why Forced to Become a Leader is true. Sometimes leadership is not chosen. It is awakened by necessity. Think about a young Abraham Lincoln, failing in business, losing elections, facing disappointment after disappointment. If comfort had been his teacher, the world may never have known his depth. But pressure shaped his patience. Pain sharpened his mind. Rejection strengthened his resolve. And when the nation needed a steady hand, the burden he had carried in private had already prepared him for public responsibility. History proves that forced to become a leader is not just a dramatic statement. It is a law of development. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that what lies within us is greater than what lies before us. That means the external pressure is only valuable if it awakens internal power. A burden can break an immature person, but it can also build a mature one. The difference is not the size of the burden. The difference is the depth of the character. That is why some people complain while others grow. Some people ask, why is this happening to me? while others ask, "What must I become because of this?" One question keeps you trapped, the other makes you a leader. There is a story in every family, every workplace, every classroom, every neighborhood. The person who was overlooked becomes the person everyone turns to when trouble comes. Why? Because crisis does not care about popularity. Crisis looks for capacity, and capacity is built when responsibility arrives before comfort. So that is why the title of this message is true: Force to become a leader. Not because force is pleasant, but because force reveals what ease never could. Seneca understood this when he said that difficulty strengthens the mind as labor does the body. In other words, strain is not always a sign of destruction. Sometimes it is a sign of formation. The hand that has never worked cannot understand the value of effort. The mind that has never suffered cannot understand the value of wisdom. And the soul that has never been tested cannot understand the cost of leadership. Look closely at your own life. Maybe you were the one who had to stay calm while everyone else broke down. Maybe you were the one who had to grow faster than your age. Maybe you were forced to become the dependable one before you ever felt ready. That experience may have felt unfair, but it also may have been your first leadership classroom. This is where the lesson becomes personal. Leadership is not the absence of pressure. Leadership is the ability to stand under pressure without losing your purpose. A leader is not someone who never feels fear. A leader is someone who refuses to let fear make the final decision. A leader is not someone who always has answers. A leader is someone who keeps moving until answers are found. And that is why this principle cannot be ignored, because the burden you resent may be the very thing that is building your authority. The pressure you wish would disappear may be the exact force developing your endurance. The responsibility you never asked for may be the stage where your leadership is being born. So remember this: if life has placed weight on you, do not immediately assume it is only suffering. It may be shaping. If people are looking to you, do not instantly assume you are unprepared. It may mean you are being trusted with more than you realize. And if your season feels heavy, do not conclude that you are weak. You may simply be in the process of becoming strong enough to carry something greater. That is why force to become a leader is true, because leadership often begins the moment responsibility arrives before common thought, and character rises to meet the demand. And once you understand that burden reveals character, the next question becomes even deeper. How do you turn that burden into vision? Because carrying weight is not enough. A true leader must also know where the weight is taking him. And that is where the next chapter begins. What we learned in the last chapter is that burden is not always punishment. Sometimes it is the very place where character is revealed. And once that truth settles into your heart, the next question becomes unavoidable. What is this burden trying to produce in me? Because if pressure only reveals character, then vision tells you what to do with that character. There is a painful mistake many people make when life becomes heavy. They assume that the weight itself is the problem, but often the weight is not the problem. The problem is that they have no picture strong enough to guide them through it. A person can survive a hard season without vision, but they cannot lead through it without one. That is why leaders are not just strong people. They are seeing people. They look into chaos and still recognize purpose. They look into confusion and still recognize order. They look into delay and still recognize destiny. And this is where the story becomes deeper. Imagine a young man standing in the middle of a storm in his own home. The bills are behind. The atmosphere is tense. People are asking questions he cannot fully answer. He feels the pressure of being needed, but he also feels the danger of being lost. In that moment, he has two choices. He can become emotional and collapse under the demand, or he can become reflective and ask, what is this season teaching me about the future? That second choice is the beginning of vision. Viktor Frankl understood something powerful when he said that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. That is not only a survival principle, that is a leadership principle. Because leaders do not wait for perfect conditions to think clearly. They learn to create direction while conditions are still imperfect. History proves this again and again. Winston Churchill did not become a great wartime leader because the times were easy. He became a great wartime leader because the times were terrible, and he refused to let fear define the nation's future. He spoke with conviction when others wanted silence. He saw the possibility of victory when others only saw threat. So that is why forced to become a leader is true. Pressure does not only expose weakness, it can awaken sight. A person with no vision will always interpret responsibility as a burden only, but a person with vision begins to see responsibility as a trust. The same load that crushes one person becomes the training ground of another. Why? Because the leader is not just carrying weight, the leader is carrying meaning. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that what lies before us and what lies behind us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. In other words, your greatest problem is not always the outside situation. Sometimes your greatest problem is the smallness of the picture you are carrying in your mind. If your vision is small, your suffering feels larger. If your vision is strong, your suffering becomes manageable. That is why some people become bitter when life gets hard. They only see what is being taken, but others become better because they start seeing what is being built. They understand that hardship can educate the soul. They understand that responsibility can enlarge the mind. They understand that the future is often discovered under pressure, not in comfort. Think about Abraham Lincoln again. He was not only shaped by failure, he was shaped by interpretation. He did not see every setback as a verdict. He saw it as preparation. That is a powerful leadership lesson. A loss is not always a final statement. Sometimes it is a draft. A delay is not always a denial. Sometimes it is a design. And a burden is not always a curse. Sometimes it is a call. That is why the principle behind force to become a leader cannot be ignored. The moment life places weight on your shoulders, it also gives you a choice about perspective. Will you see only stress, or will you see strategy? Will you only feel pressure, or will you begin to search for purpose? This is where practical leadership begins. The student who is forced to lead a group project learns more than organization. He learns responsibility. The young woman who has to hold her family together learns more than patience. She learns vision. The employee who must solve a crisis learns more than efficiency. He learns how to think ahead. That is how forced responsibility becomes leadership development. And maybe that is exactly what has been happening in your own life. Maybe you have been carrying things you never asked for. Maybe you have been required to grow in seasons when you wanted rest. Maybe you have had to look stable while feeling uncertain inside. But if you remain teachable, those moments will not just harden you, they will enlarge you. That is the emotional truth hidden inside this chapter. Vision is often born where comfort ends. A leader cannot be built only by motivation. He must be built by meaning. He needs something bigger than his pain to hold on to. He needs a future strong enough to pull him through the present. So when life forces you to lead, do not only ask, why me? Ask, what future is being formed through me? That question changes everything. It turns frustration into focus. It turns survival into strategy. It turns burden into direction. So that is why forced to become a leader is true. Because responsibility does not just test your character, it awakens your sight. It teaches you to see beyond the present and to move with purpose. And now that character has been revealed and vision has been awakened, the journey goes even deeper. Because knowing what to carry is one thing, knowing how to endure the fire that comes with it is another. And that is where the next chapter begins. What we learned in the last chapter is that vision is born in responsibility. Once a person stops seeing burden as punishment and starts seeing it as purpose, something changes inside them. But even then, the journey is not finished. Because a vision without endurance cannot survive the fire that comes with it. And that is where this chapter begins. When life forces you to lead, it does not stop at giving you responsibility. It also allows pressure to refine you. It allows opposition to test whether your vision is real or only emotional. It allows hardship to ask the final question: will you remain faithful when the heat rises? This is where many people discover the difference between desire and discipline. Desire says, I want to lead. Discipline says, I will remain steady when leadership becomes costly. Desire can start a journey, but discipline carries it through the fire. That is why the leader is not simply the one with a dream. The leader is the one who can protect that dream under pressure. Thomas Edison understood this kind of fire. People often celebrate the light bulb, but they forget the long darkness before the light. He did not arrive at success by avoiding failure. He arrived at success by refusing to let failure define him. He learned to see every setback as information, every mistake as instruction, every delay as part of the process. That is leadership wisdom, and that is exactly why force to become a leader is true. Sometimes the fire you want to escape is the same fire that is purifying your gift. History always confirms this truth. Think of Nelson Mandela, who carried the weight of imprisonment for years. Many would have emerged bitter, broken, and resentful. But Mandela emerged with a deeper strength. His suffering did not destroy his leadership, it refined it. He learned to carry a nation because he had already learned to carry pain. He became greater not because the fire was absent, but because the fire could not consume his purpose. History proves that force to become a leader is not merely about pressure. It is about purification. The old thinkers understood this too. Aristotle said that excellence is a habit, not an accident. That means greatness is not proven in a single emotional moment. It is proven in repeated response. Every time fire comes and you do not quit, you are becoming excellent. Every time disappointment comes and you do not collapse, you are becoming steady. Every time criticism comes and you do not lose your center, you are becoming a leader. Seneca said that difficulty strengthens the mind, as labor strengthens the body. That principle is powerful because it reveals something we often forget. Fire does not only expose what is weak, it strengthens what is sincere. A leader who truly believes in purpose does not crumble at the first sign of resistance. He learns, he adapts, he grows. That is why the fire is not wasted. It is forming the very qualities leadership requires: patience, courage, restraint, wisdom, and maturity. And now this becomes personal again. Maybe you have walked through a season where nothing seemed easy. Maybe people misunderstood you. Maybe your efforts were criticized. Maybe your plans were delayed. Maybe you were forced to keep moving while your emotions wanted to stop. That kind of season can either harden you into bitterness or deepen you into wisdom. The choice is yours. A person who has never been tested may speak about leadership, but a person who has been refined by fire carries something different. He carries authenticity. He knows what it means to be stretched. He knows what it means to be corrected. He knows what it means to continue when comfort is gone. And because of that, people trust him in crisis. That is practical leadership. Not just knowing what to say when things are calm, but knowing who you are when things become severe. Winston Churchill once said that success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. That statement sounds simple, but it carries the heartbeat of leadership. Continuance is often the true test. Anyone can begin with enthusiasm, but can you continue when the applause stops? Can you continue when progress is slow? Can you continue when the fire does not feel gentle? That is where leaders are separated from spectators. And that is why the principle behind force to become a leader cannot be ignored. The fire that comes with responsibility is not always there to destroy you. Often it is there to remove what is immature, what is unstable, what is careless, and what is untested. Fire reveals what is real. It burns away illusions. It leaves behind only the strength that can endure. That is the emotional truth of this chapter. The pressure you resent may be the exact tool God, life, or destiny is using to purify you. The criticism you dislike may be sharpening your humility. The delay you fear may be strengthening your patience. The hardship you want to escape may be preparing you to handle greater responsibility with wisdom instead of pride. So when the fire comes, do not only ask for rescue, ask for refinement. Do not only ask for relief, ask for growth. Do not only ask for ease, ask for depth. Because a leader is not built in comfort. A leader is forged in fire. This is why become a leader is true. Pressure reveals character, vision gives direction, and fire purifies the one who must carry both. The more you endure without losing your purpose, the more your leadership becomes believable. And now the journey moves toward its final truth. Because once character has been revealed, vision awakened, and fire has refined the soul, there remains one final question. What does a leader do with all of this? How does a person who has been forced, tested, and purified finally live in the world? That answer will take us into the next chapter, where leadership stops being survival and becomes service. What we learned in the last chapter is that pressure reveals character, vision gives direction, and fire purifies the one who must carry both. But even after a person has been tested and refined, the journey is still not complete, because the final purpose of leadership is never self-exaltation. The final purpose of leadership is service. That is the great turning point. A person may begin by carrying a burden, then grow into vision, then survive the fire. But if all of that only makes him more proud, more self-centered, and more interested in status, then the process has been wasted. Leadership was never meant to end in ego. It was meant to end in usefulness. That is why mature leaders eventually stop asking, "How do I become important?" and start asking, "How do I become valuable?" That question changes the whole life. Imagine a young man who once thought leadership meant being noticed. He wanted recognition, influence, and applause. But life forced him into responsibility. He had to protect his family, solve problems, and stay strong when others were weak. Then the fire came. He was criticized, delayed, stretched, and tested. And somewhere in that process, something beautiful happened. He stopped trying to impress people and started trying to help people. That is where leadership becomes real. Miles Monroe often taught that true success is not what you acquire, but what you fulfill. That idea carries deep wisdom, because a person can gain position and still miss purpose. A person can be applauded and still be empty. A person can be seen and still not serve. But when responsibility matures into service, leadership becomes a blessing to others, not just a badge for the self. History proves this again and again. Abraham Lincoln did not lead for image. He led because a nation needed moral courage. Mother Teresa did not serve because it was glamorous. She served because suffering people needed dignity. Martin Luther King Jr. did not speak because it was safe. He spoke because justice demanded a voice. These lives remind us that greatness is not measured by how high you stand, but by how deeply you care. That is why forced to become a leader is true, because sometimes life pushes you upward, not so you can dominate others, but so you can lift others. A leader who has never suffered can become cruel because he has no empathy. But a leader who has been refined by hardship learns how to carry people, not just command them. He remembers what it felt like to be overwhelmed. He remembers what it meant to need strength from somewhere beyond himself. And because of that memory, he becomes gentle without becoming weak, strong without becoming harsh, confident without becoming blind. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that the purpose of life is not merely to be happy, but to be useful, honorable, and compassionate. That is a leadership principle. Service gives meaning to strength. Without service, strength becomes vanity. Without service, vision becomes ambition. Without service, fire becomes waste. But when a leader serves, every lesson he has suffered becomes useful. Think of Marcus Aurelius. He was a ruler, yet he wrote like a man who understood duty more than privilege. He knew that power without virtue is dangerous. He understood that authority must be guided by conscience. That is a timeless lesson for leadership. The higher you rise, the more you must bend toward responsibility, not pride. And this becomes practical in everyday life. The leader in a family is not always the loudest one. Sometimes it is the one who absorbs tension so others can heal. The leader in a classroom is not always the smartest one. Sometimes it is the one who encourages others to believe in themselves. The leader in a workplace is not always the boss. Sometimes it is the one who stays steady solves problems, and serves the team with integrity. Leadership shows itself most clearly when people need something from you that only maturity can give. Maybe that is the place you are standing in right now. Maybe people are looking to you not because you feel ready, but because they need someone dependable. Maybe your past pain has given you a depth others do not yet have. Maybe your trials have trained your heart to understand people better. If so, then do not waste that pain. Let it become service. That is the emotional truth of this chapter. The strongest leaders are often the most compassionate. The hardest seasons often create the deepest servants. The person who has been forced to grow can become the person who helps others grow. And that is when leadership becomes holy, because it stops being about self-preservation and starts being about contribution. So when you look at your skills, Mr. Sigma, your close contenders, your best friend, life now, do not ask only what you have endured. Ask what your endurance is for. Do not ask only what you have survived. Ask who your survival is supposed to help. Do not ask only how you were forced to lead. Ask how your leadership can bless others. That is why the principle behind force to become a leader cannot be ignored. The burden taught character. The burden awakened vision. The fire purified the soul. And now all of it must become service. That is the full circle of leadership. So this is why force to become a leader is true. Because life may begin by pressing you, but wisdom turns that pressure into purpose, and purpose into service. And once you understand that, you are no longer just surviving your season. You are becoming the kind of leader others can trust. And now the journey is ready for its final movement, because all that remains is to gather the lessons of burden, vision, fire, and service into one final truth. That truth will not only complete the message, it will leave a challenge in the heart. And that is where the conclusion begins. Look back over the journey. At first, leadership came as burden. Life placed weight on your shoulders before you felt ready. Then leadership became vision. You learned to see beyond the pain and ask what it was preparing you for. Then leadership became refinement. The fire tested your heart, purified your motives, and made you stronger. And finally, leadership became service. You discovered that real greatness is not control, but usefulness. That is the whole message. Leadership is not always chosen in peace. Sometimes it is forced in pressure. But that pressure is not your enemy if it awakens purpose in you. As you move forward, remember this. If life has placed responsibility on you, do not despise it. If the burden feels too large, do not run from it too quickly. If the fire is hot, do not assume you are being destroyed. You may be being prepared. You may be being shaped. You may be being summoned. Seneca was right. Hardship can strengthen the mind. Frankl was right. When you cannot change the situation, you change yourself. Roosevelt was right. Courage matters more than comfort. And the wisdom of every great thinker points to one simple truth. Leaders are often made where ordinary people break. So take this into your life today. Stop waiting to feel like a leader before acting like one. Start where you are. Carry what is in front of you. Learn from the pressure. Guard your character. Build your vision. Serve people well. Because the world does not only need talented people. It needs tested people. It needs wise people. It needs people who are forced to become leaders and answered that call with courage. And that is the moral of this speech. When life forces responsibility onto your shoulders, do not curse the weight, because the weight may be the very thing that reveals your leadership. That is why force to become a leader is true.